now that we get that space and time is in the realm of appearances, we have another sort of layer of this filter, or of this subjective filter, that's a bit more complicated, but also really important. Um, yeah, and it's more important to Husserl, so that's why we're going to talk about it. So these are called the categories. And so these are basically a table of pure concepts that apply to any object in general. So once you have things in terms of space and time, basically these pure concepts apply to that experience, that experience that's schematized in terms of space and time, and apply some logical judgment to it.
What's schematize?
That's a very technical Kantian word. Sorry. It just means to sort of like arrange in a format.
So it means categorize.
No. I meant that like space and time is sort of like the part that's like schematized. There's a lot of complexity to how the space and time relates to the categories, which we can't afford to get into.
Okay.
But basically, like you have space and time, and then once you have like a spatial understanding of what the objects are doing, then you use the categories to apply some logical judgment to that object. So my example here is like you have the apple, you have it in terms of space and time, and then how do you get from that to like there's an apple on the table? Like some judgment about what the object is doing that you could express in language.
That,
you see?
the thing you just said involves more than apple as an object. It also involves table.
Okay, let's just assume there's a table here, but that would fit into like, or just like on the table is some attribute of the apple in this judgment.
On the table is an attribute of the apple.
Yeah, let's think of it that way.
Okay.
It's just, yeah, you just, like, let's just say you look at the object, or let's say it's on the ground, or something simple. Like, you just have some sense of where it is and what it's doing. And you can express that in ways that's understood universally, at least to people who speak the language. But, like, Kant would believe that it's sort of logically universal, what's expressed in language. So, I think he believed that like things could really be translated without any loss of meaning, like that there is some logical core to our statements.
Wait, things cannot be translated.
Things can be translated without any loss of meaning, at least in Kant's view of the world. So like language just expresses these like logical essences. And so
then that's why AI can preview.
Okay, no, not he didn't think about AI yet. Okay.
Oh, he didn't know about AI.
Yeah, I know. So,
but if he knew about it, he would be supportive of that view, right? Like AI could study and use languages.
It's debatable where Kant would fall in today's philosophical environment.
What's your view? This.
I think there's a separation between the early and later Kant. And the early Kant might have sided more with like the technical, like logical analytic philosophy of like Carnap and people like that.
Okay, so is that side saying AI can understand and use language?
Yeah, there are some who believe that AI, there are some philosophers who might believe that, that AI is just could just replicate our logical functions. He just believed that, like, in order to explain how we think, basically, Kant believed that we essentially think in terms of judgments. Like we form judgments are basically what we call today logical propositions. Like we form logical propositions on our experience, and the way he explained how that happened was through these categories, which are like pure concepts. And when I use pure, it just means that it doesn't involve experience at all. It's not empirical in any way. Meaning that it doesn't, the ideas precede reality. The ideas precede experience. You don't gather them from your experience.
You just create them in your head.
They're just there.
Okay.
All he can say is that they're there.
Okay.
Yeah, the way they originate is a very ambiguous question, and this is what Husserl had a problem with.
You mentioned early Kant's view on AI language ability. How about the old Kant?
Later Kant?
Yeah, later.
Let's just not go there. It's yeah, like the later Kant is like the later Kant like basically starts to reconsider that separation between the phenomenal and noumenal, and thinks that there's sort of a dialogue between them in a way. But yeah, we don't have to get into that. And that's the part that more influenced Hegel, who succeeded him. But basically, there are these pure concepts, pure meaning that they do not involve experience, that apply to any object in general. So this is the generic format in which an object appears to thought, in which we think about an object. So basically what the categories do is that they determine the logical function of a particular judgment. So there are these 4 groups, and there's these 3 types that they can undertake. So there's quantity, quality, modality, and relation. So these are 4. I think those are what he'd call the categories.
What is modality?
Modality is like has to do with necessity and possibility.
Like the percentage, like the likelihood something is true.
Yeah. So if you said like 2 + 2 = 4, that's what he would call. That would be a different modality. That would what he called apodictic. But this one, there is an apple on the table. That might not always be true. And he called that assertoric. So it's sometimes true, sometimes not. But some judgments you say are true with necessity, like mathematical judgments. And those are always apodictic. So this is one aspect of its logical function. The other one is like, quality is like affirmative. That just means that it's like basically that it's something you say is true of reality. Like the other one's negation or limitation. Relation, that's categorical. That just means that it's like an attribute of a substance. So it's like an attribute of the apple. Or at least the way I logically interpreted this. And quantity, singular, is like of one single object. Like some apple on the table would be a plurality. All apples are on the table, which would be start to get sort of meaningless, would be that would be a totality. Yeah, but yeah, so basically these categories determine, like, space and time gets sorted into these categories, and then that determines like the logical function of your judgment of experience, like how you experience an object and what it means for like your logical reality, like your logical view of the world. So these categories are part of what Kant called Transcendental Logic. I tried translating this into Chinese because it's a pretty complicated term. But Transcendental Logic, it's like, so this is like something like prior to logic for him. This isn't explaining like logic, like logic in general is about like explaining the rules of inference. But this is like, these are like the concepts that must exist to make logic possible. This is what he means by transcendental. Yeah, so, and he doesn't really explain where these came from. That's Husserl's problem with him. He performs what he calls the transcendental deduction. So he starts with the way we experience the world, and he asks like, what concepts must we have to make that experience possible? And then that's how he arrives at these categories. So these are like the most generic concepts that everyone must carry with them. And and his argument is that like the thing he tries to argue in the Critique of Pure Reason is that these could not be drawn from experience. Like you couldn't learn these concepts. Yeah, they must just be like these pure concepts that just basically make up the subject.
I see.
Make up the nature of the subject. Yeah, so that's Kant basically.